Hello, my name is Jansen, and I am a senior university student at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Today, we're going to be attempting to basically open up a conversation about mental health and well being, specifically relating to university students. This is for a project of mine, but I've become more passionate about this topic. Being a university student myself, I've gone through ups and downs with well being and mental health and still going through that. But I feel like that university students are one of the most vulnerable population for depleted mental health and well-being. And we're going to be having a conversation about that. And I have a guest here today. I have my professor here, Dr. Ross Laird. He is my professor this semester. He's an expert. Can I call you expert from that one, Dr. Ross?
Well, it's interesting that label expert just there.
Yeah.
One of the things I find with mental health is that the more you know about it, the more tentative you become, you
Yeah.
know, and sort
Eh,
of thinking that, you know the answer to things with regard to
yeah.
mental health because everybody's a little bit different. But yeah, that's my area of practice.
Yeah, that's his area of practice. And it's been so well because I have a class with him and it's such a different class. We go into nature, we talk, and we do Tai Chi in class. How cool is that? What else can I ask for, right? So, again, I'm going to be interviewing him basically, but I want this to be just a conversation so we as students can learn more about mental health and well being. And we will briefly touch on more topics relating to that one. But for starters, I just want to ask Dr. Laird over here. Dr. Laird, what do you think is the most important part of mental health and well being that people often forget about or they don't think about too much?
Well, I think that in this current moment we're living in, where there's a lot of external pressure and a lot of external stress coming at everybody, right? There's climate anxiety, political
Yeah.
anxiety, social
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, a lot of things, and there's a kind of acceleration of all that,
Mm-hmm.
especially for young people. And so the focus tends to be on the outside world around us and
Yes.
on how we're impacted by that. And that makes it really difficult for people to tune inward and slow down and work on their self awareness. I think it's fair to say that in my field, if you were to ask people in general, what do you think is the most important feature of mental health? Most people would have self awareness in the top three. That ability to be aware in any given moment of what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what's going
Mm-hmm.
on inside of ourselves, inside the
Mm-hmm.
inner life. And, with all this external stuff going on around us and all the sort of addictive distractions that we're immersed in as well, all the media we
Mm-hmm.
consume in particular, it makes it really hard for people just to have moments of stillness and quiet in which
Mm-hmm.
the inner life tends to surface a bit, and we're also
Yeah.
trained in our society now to run away from that stuff. If we
Yeah.
start to get feelings that makes us uncomfortable, we should do something to make them go away.
Mm-hmm.
And that adds to the whole challenge here, that it's really hard for people to be aware of themselves right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I totally agree with you. As someone who's not necessarily always online as I used to before, I can definitely relate to that one because I feel like being in media all the time gets me at least in that position where I can escape from things. But then as soon as I get in there, I feel like I get like attacked from all fronts. I get
Mhm.
news from like all I get like bad news from like the other side of the world and then I get news from here and then it's just everywhere and it is a little bit overwhelming and then to a point I do shut down at that point. And on
Mhm.
top of that, I have a lot of things that I have to worry about here. So like it's kind of like I go into this cycle of like I'm trying to escape my problems from here and then I go into online and then I get into the problems there. So it's
Mhm.
just like, oh my God, what am I gonna do with myself? And
Yeah.
then I was just like, okay, I'm not gonna talk to anyone.
Yeah. And also in the
Yeah.
meantime, while we spend all this time online, and the average now for a lot of people is, 12 hours a day, right? So
Yeah.
as we spend all this time online, the reason that we went there in the first place, which is to escape stuff we're struggling with, that stuff doesn't go away. It actually gets
Yeah.
worse because during
No, for
all the time
sure.
we've been online, that stuff has been percolating away, and whatever
Mhm.
it is we're not dealing with has grown a little bit.
Mhm.
And so we end up in this really kind of stuck position. And a lot of people are just feeling, I think, especially a lot of young people, especially a lot of university
Mhm.
students, they're just
Yeah.
feeling kind of overwhelmed and a bit shut down around all this. It's
Yeah.
just too much, right? And so the tendency is to retreat and withdraw and
Mhm.
isolate. And of course, we know that these are like the worst things you can do, but it's
Yeah.
the natural instinct for people to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's like some of the things that a lot of people, a lot of my peers from school, a lot of my peers just in general that I grew up in since high school, that's what they say, right? It's that school already makes it so hard for them to keep up with social life. And then trying to be online to stay connected with them, it doesn't help because what happens is you connect for like 1 minute and then the next it's just like it's gone again. It's very
Hmm.
inconsistent in that way.
Yeah.
And I've been hearing a lot of people, and one of my friend actually started this thing where she would take a social media break. And I started doing that, and I would bring it up to more and more people just to just kind of like, hey, it's actually nice to like maybe just take like a month off social media, and it is refreshing in a way. Because again, I don't know, something about having that break from knowing everything does kind of help me to recuperate the
Sure.
overwhelmingness of everything.
Yeah,
It's
I
like,
think
oh
being
my,
able to
yeah.
yeah, I think being able to step back from social media or from these distractions. I mean, it's kind of trite to call them distractions because they're not really distractions in the traditional sense. They're
Yeah.
sort of coping distractions or
Mhm.
distractions that serve a mental health function. I think that's an
Mhm.
important thing to say about mental health. These behaviors that we do, which broadly we could call them addictive behaviors, these are a
Mhm.
search for healing and growth and peace and safety, right? It's not like
Yeah.
people are doing these things because they want to harm themselves. They're doing these things because they want to feel better. So it's the
Yeah.
search for something that will help me feel better, right? That drives
Mhm.
all this. But of course, in the end, it makes you feel worse. And so
Mhm.
so pulling back from that, having a break from that, um, it's probably gonna have 2 different effects, right? One effect
Mhm.
is that you might feel worse before you feel better, right? You might feel
Yeah.
disconnected or lonely or something
Yeah.
first before
Mhm.
you feel better. So there's still some grappling with
Mhm.
feelings that's gonna happen there. The other thing is that, and I noticed this a lot this semester in particular, when we're
Mhm.
coming back into the classroom after 2 years of remote learning, a lot of learners are just really almost paralyzed around social connection, right?
Yeah.
Talking to other people. Talking to other
Yeah.
people is an overwhelmingly anxiety
Mhm.
provoking thing, right?
Yeah.
Talking to people, talking in class, being in
Yeah.
a small group discussion. As you know, I really push it in my classes that people do this, but
Mm.
I do notice that no matter how much I try to facilitate that and make it safe to do, there's
Mhm.
still quite a number of people who just can't do it. They're not in the space to be able to do it. And I think that's
Yeah.
a really challenging outcome for them because
Mhm.
how are you supposed to move toward health and wellness, which is largely about social connection, if you
Mhm.
can't connect socially?
I know. I actually noticed that as well because like for us students at least, we were used to getting put in like I forgot what it's called. Like, those Zoom rooms, the
Hmm.
rooms in Zoom
Breakout
meetings.
rooms. Hmm.
Yeah, the breakout rooms. So we're put in breakout rooms, and if I'm being honest with you, probably 95% of the time no one talks in those breakout rooms for 5 minutes when we're supposed to be discussing. And then when it comes to like, oh, discussion part, what did your group talk about? What's gonna happen is whoever actually has the idea and wanted to have the conversation, we just bring it up with the rest of the class so the professor hears what
Yeah.
they wanted to add in. But again, no one, because I feel like, at least for me, no one tries to start the conversation because people are afraid to start the conversation. And I myself am one of those. As
Mhm.
someone who's been in university for years now, I got to a point where I wasn't comfortable in my first 2 years, and then slowly I got comfortable. Then boom, COVID hit, and I think that's one of the biggest things that really affected like students a lot, because not only did it affect how our whole schooling works and how we're trying to learn, it affected how we are actually interacting with the professors, with our classmates, and it's so much harder to find help because
Yeah.
it's hard to make friends in
Yeah, it
class.
is. And
Yeah.
and and on the flip side of it, when you look at what happens for educators in this scenario,
Yeah.
they have a limited toolbox really for this kind of thing. And one of the tendencies in this sort of scenario is to say, okay, well, if students aren't speaking up, then let's make speaking up something that you get graded on, right? Or
Yeah.
let's give points for speaking up, or make it a requirement or something like that. And and
Mhm.
and and you can do that, and
Mhm.
and probably some people will speak up more, but it doesn't really solve the underlying issue, because so much of what we know about how people learn and grow is about
Mhm.
being internally motivated to do it, like
Yeah.
wanting to do it because it will be good for you, even if it might be uncomfortable to do it.
Yeah.
And so, since post-secondary education and secondary education too, to a large extent, is kind of built in the opposite manner. It's kind of built on contingency and control, and making
Mhm.
sure that students do what instructors want.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not really well positioned to be able to kind of turn that a little bit and try to be more inviting and welcoming and open and friendly and emotionally safe. And
Mhm.
so what I hear about from a lot of, especially on social media, what I hear about this in this particular moment is that educators are getting, they're kind of bewildered about, well, how do I get my students to speak up?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
maybe I should make it a requirement to speak up, and maybe I
Mhm.
should give grades for speaking up, and that takes educators down that whole track of um, allowing education to be a persistently emotionally awkward and difficult place, and that's not
Yeah.
helpful.
It definitely isn't, because it puts a lot of pressures on students, and what happens is it just stresses us out and it gives us a lot of anxiety, because for a lot of people it's just really, they don't want to talk
Hmm.
because of like some like, I don't know, it's not like social anxiety per se, but it's sort of that
It,
way.
it is. It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And we know from the research in counseling and therapy that if someone doesn't want to talk, forcing them to talk is not really the solution to the
Yeah.
issue at hand, right? You
Mhm.
have to excavate a little bit deeper and be curious about, well, what makes it unsafe for this person to speak? And
Mhm.
how could we adjust the environment for them so that they feel safe
Mhm.
enough to speak?
Mhm.
And that means we might need to deconstruct how the environment works. And
Mhm.
that's hard to do in education because of the traditions. They're very fossilized. And even though there's a lot of research to show that things like, being internally motivated,
Mhm.
focusing on empathy, self-awareness,
Mhm.
self-regulation, these kinds of things are really how we learn. But
Mhm.
these things are not widely implemented in education, and so it kind of remains in a certain frame, and the system is set up in a certain way to kind of
Yeah.
allow that frame to persist. And so right now, I feel like the university system in particular is not really responding very well to what students need. It's not set up to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And
But it could
I
be, right? It could be.
yeah. See, that's the thing. When the whole online thing happened and basically everyone is stressed about the whole like online, I'm like, what are we going to do? How are we going to do the test? How are we even going to teach the class? And then there was a point where one of my professors fostered a discussion with the class where how would you students would design a class in an online way that would work better for the students than what we're doing right now, which is like the asynchronous slash synchronous type of classes. Really, I at that point I didn't even know, and that's when I put myself in the position of educators, where how would I even do that? Because what was being done at that point is what probably I would suggest because I'm like, okay, this is the most practical way to teach things.
Hmm.
But obviously, it's not working for the student because I'm the student myself experiencing it. So
Yeah. And
I do agree with you that in the system of it all, it's just hard to kind of prioritize which like the student's comfort or the student's learning or the student's participation, and there's just so many things to take in there, and then at the end of it, like students just get so drained with everything,
mhm.
and at the end of the semester everyone's just like, I didn't even learn anything,
Yeah.
and that just
Yeah.
adds to the stress of it all as well.
Yeah.
So
It's really problematic. And I think
yeah.
education is having a bit of a reckoning with this right now because
Mm-hmm.
it's been known for a while that post-secondary education with its delivery model, right? The idea
Yeah.
is that experts in their fields deliver content to learners who then kind of regurgitate it back to the
Yeah.
instructor who evaluates how accurately they
Mm-hmm.
regurgitated it, and then they get a
Mm-hmm.
grade. That model is not really consistent with what we know about how people learn, and it's certainly not helpful in helping a vulnerable population of young people right now who have
Mm-hmm.
what might be the highest rates of mental illness in our society right now, right?
Yeah.
University students. So the post-secondary system's not really responding to this very well. And when
Mm-hmm.
they do respond, what they say is, and legitimately, they say, we're not counselors. This is not our job, which is true, and so the resources tend to go into things like counseling. Let's hire more counselors. Let's create programs where we can kind of funnel students who are struggling into counseling or counseling type programs, and all of that's fine. But I think what's missed there, or one of the things that's missed there, is that mental health is a responsibility of everyone in the community, of
Mm-hmm.
everyone in this educational community we're in. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's a bit of a dodge for educators to say it's not my job. It is their
Yeah.
job. It's true
Yeah.
they're not counselors, and we wouldn't
Yeah.
we wouldn't want everybody to be, trained as counselors in education. We do need, a variety of people with a variety of approaches, but the way it is now, it's still quite feasible for an instructor to say, mental health is not my job. Taking care of students' emotional well-being is not my job. And and they can just kind of pitch it to some other program that is supposed to be able to take care of that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that doesn't really work for students,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really advance what it is that we're trying to do at the university, which is cultivate the development of young people. It's not only about knowledge
Mm-hmm.
acquisition or disciplinary knowledge or critical thinking. Those things are important, but none of them really matter as much as mental health, because mental health makes all those other things possible. And
Yeah.
without good mental health, those things are not possible.
Exactly.
So,
The
so
motivation is
yeah,
lost once,
yeah.
like, as a student, as soon as I feel like I'm not cared for by my professor or like I'm not cared for by the education system that I'm currently in, I just don't want to do it. And you know what? C's get degrees. That's the thing that like university students is like C's get degrees. But at some point I think about I'm paying good money. I
Hmm.
want to have a good grade and I want to do better and I actually want to learn. But then again, I'm glad that you brought it up how like there is this thing where um the education system or some educators would say that it's not my job to like have their emotional well-being or their mental health being uh and I don't have to think about that. That's like other people's job. My job is to teach them. But the thing is that just puts into question as well that let's say I notice as a student I am not doing very well mentally. I seek counseling. I've done this before. I've done counseling before because it does really help. And a lot of my university friends, they also have done that. But the problem is we do counseling, we go back to the place that puts us in so much stress and burns us out. So it's really hard to sustain that. So maintaining having good well-being with just doing what's being suggested to us, it really doesn't help. So a lot of people get creative and sometimes they're good coping mechanisms or sometimes they're bad coping mechanisms, and those are the things that I feel like not a lot of people know about how like oh yeah, I'm doing well mentally. I'm like, are you doing well mentally? Can you maintain that in the next few
Yeah.
months? Can you maintain that for the year?
Yeah.
And
And it
yeah,
it gets pretty heavy too when, learners get to the point that they're stressed out enough that they feel like they can't complete an assignment without cheating. And so
yeah,
the system kind of drives them into this behavior. This is adaptive coping behavior. It's not that
yeah,
people are deliberately trying to be sneaky. It's that they don't feel like
mm-hmm,
they have any other choice than to make the choice to do something that university doesn't want them to do. And so in a way, the university drives this behavior because of the way it's
yeah,
structured around grades in particular, and knowledge acquisition as being the only important thing.
mm-hmm,
And the more we see the arrival now of, say, machine learning tools for writing essays, for example, which already exists, and it's already something that people are using pretty regularly.
yeah,
This becomes more and more tempting for people to use, right? You can't be caught doing it, right? And so
yeah,
so people feel pretty confident that they can use these tools and things will be okay. But think about the hit they take for that. There's this kind of ethical sense for people that they
mm-hmm,
know they're doing something they shouldn't do, that the university would be really upset about if they were found out doing, would cause consequences that they would not want.
mm-hmm,
And so there's all this mental health baggage that comes along with this
yeah,
behavior in a situation when someone is just trying to get through the day, right?
yeah,
So there's a way in which, at least for me, there's a way in which this whole conversation also should ask, and we are doing this in this conversation here,
mm-hmm,
asking, questions about how the structures and systems of the university itself perpetuate some of these issues.
mm-hmm,
Grading, for example, perpetuates mental health corrosion. The content delivery model, which is
yeah,
which is not consistent with what research shows about how people learn, is not really a learning. It's not really a way of learning, right?
mm-hmm,
Like when an instructor stands up there and lectures for an hour, that's
mm-hmm,
not really consistent with how people
yeah.
deeply learn anything, right?
And I
So,
definitely agree with that
yeah,
one.
and
Yeah,
this is really well known and really well established
yeah,
by fields like ecological dynamics and the constraints-led approaches and nonlinear pedagogy. There's a whole bunch of people who work on this and
mm-hmm,
have demonstrated again and again and again that learning needs to be led by the learner. The
yeah,
learner needs to find a unique solution through the
mm,
maze of the discipline they're exploring. The job of the instructor is to set up an environment that cultivates learning, cultivates exploration and discovery, and
mm-hmm,
and repetition of different tasks, but in different similar tasks, but in different ways. And
mm-hmm,
there's all kinds of ways to do this. And we just haven't managed to implement it in the university system yet. People keep
mm-hmm,
talking about it, but if you walk down the hall at any university and look in classrooms, you'll see that in every one, pretty much the instructor's at the front lecturing and the students are seated at desks, doing whatever they're doing. So the system is really, really in trouble, I think, in that
mm-hmm,
way. It's managed to get by on these traditions of
mm-hmm,
academia for a long time,
mm-hmm,
but my personal experience was that I completed 2 degrees in non-traditional universities where there was no grading, and
mm-hmm.
there was a real emphasis on personal development, and that's part of why the class that you're in looks the way that it
Yeah,
looks and feels the way
yeah,
it feels, right?
yeah. And I really do appreciate the class that we have right now. What I am seeing though, at least in my psych classes, there's more variability or variety of ways that professors are teaching. So for yours example, again, we do like different things. We sit in a circle and we actually talk about the topics. We all discuss it as a class and we do activities. And I am finding out that I'm liking that more because on my other classes, what we do as well is we would do activities that relate to the lessons and then we'll discuss it in the lecture as well. And I feel like, okay, you know what? That makes sense because I actually went through it myself. And another class, again, would be bringing in guest speakers that have lived through the experience themselves and explain the experience with personal anecdotes in class. And that makes it feel more personal that we're
Sure.
seeing it up close rather than reading it from a textbook.
Yeah.
Because I love reading, but I really hate reading textbooks. And I
Mhm.
know this is one of our topics in class, our reading project. And I'm just, trying to rediscover how, like, you know what, I actually do like reading. I just don't like reading textbook.
Yeah,
Oh,
so as a learner, you're experiencing this continuum
yeah.
yourself, having
Yes,
some
I
classroom
am.
experiences where you go, "Oh, I get it. Why we're doing it this way. This makes sense.
Exactly.
Let's keep doing it this
Mhm.
way." And then you're also experiencing the other side, which is, I see why this doesn't really work for a lot of people, right? If
Mhm.
we just sit here and we're supposed to just wait until the other person's done. Yeah.
Mhm. Exactly. And again, I've been in university for years now. I've taken my time with my degree, but hoping to finish my degree by this semester. But I uh, I do see the change that's happening, at least in our own institution at Quantlet. And I'm hoping to see more change happening in the future, because I do agree with you with the way the system is built right now, or is working right now. It puts a lot of strains in the students as well as the professors of, I think it's just COVID, like what you said, COVID really affected how everything worked. And it's just like, you know what? Guess what? We're doing it a different way. And then
Mhm.
it opened up a lot of questions. I'm like, hey, did we notice that this is not working before? We're noticing now because it's on our face now, type of
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
But since we're on the topic of learning during COVID times, I do want to discuss more of how COVID affected students, particularly students' mental health and well-being. But I think particularly COVID affected how we were learning and our mental health and well-being, not just from what we discussed earlier, which is our social, how we socially interact. We've become more to ourselves because we've had more increased anxiety with social interaction. But also, I think now, at least from what I notice, is that we're also very anxious with in-person learning. I don't know if
Mhm.
any students have ever brought this up with you, but the whole COVID thing, it made us used to having a quiet place to take exams in our own space, also having open book exams. That kind of helped a bit, but now slowly, some professors are trying to get rid of that one. And it's something very anxiety inducing, at
Of
least for
course.
me,
And
right?
it comes at a difficult time. I mean, if we think about this as a developmental challenge,
Mm-hmm.
for someone like me who is a senior citizen, 2 years of COVID is a small proportion of time relative to how long I've been around.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening at a time in my life when my development as a human is finished. Well, many, many, many years ago is finished in terms of
Yeah.
the nervous system and the brain and all that kind of stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
but if we roll that back to learners in university, somewhere between, 19 and 28 or so, which is when we think roughly that developmental nervous system thing sort of starts to wrap up
Mm-hmm.
and we finish our development. We're talking about people who are sort of still in the midst of that, who are still,
Mm-hmm.
if you're in your early 20s, you're quite a few years away from that finish. So you're still in this vulnerable developing period, which is
Mm-hmm.
largely based on social connection and social navigation. And
Mm-hmm.
it's especially important because if we think about the psychological milestones that university students are going through, a lot of them have to do with things like identifying with ourselves outside of the family, like leaving home and
Yeah.
going to school and thinking about what part of my family structure do I want to keep? What kind of values that I got from my family do I want to
Mm-hmm.
keep? Which ones do I want to make my own or adjust? Or what do I want to do? How do I want to feel about, things like religion, culture, all these things that I grew up with? What do I want to do with them all? Right. And
Yeah.
any good, decent, depth-oriented personal development at this age
Mm-hmm.
involves grappling with all this stuff and asking
Mm-hmm.
yourself, what do I want to keep and what do I want to get let go of, as I move out and become an individual in my own right
Mm-hmm.
as an adult. This is really complicated and it's all wrapped up with social connections, relationships, being with people, being in communities, being in groups, this kind of stuff. So and this happens for most people between, 19 and 23, 24, 25. So if you take all of that away, if you take a couple of years, if you take half that time away by putting people in isolation for a couple of years, that's going to leave a mark, right? I mean, that's going to really put some kind of significant barrier in the way of people completing these tasks so that when they're trying to complete them, they're going to be
Mhm.
more anxious or more uncertain. The pathways are going to feel more difficult, more stressful.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff's going to go on there that's just going to cause people to feel like, you know what, I'm just not feeling very comfortable.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the biggest challenges post-COVID, or at least, no, not post-COVID, living through COVID as a young adult is that I felt like I was lost. I lost my identity. I didn't even want to finish my degree at that point because I was just cut off from my school life and I
Hmm.
was cut off from my friends. And I was with my family all the time and living through that quarantine, it just it just felt like I wasn't part of the world anymore and I was just in my own thing and I lost a big part of my identity, which was a university student.
Yeah,
And
that's completely understandable.
yeah, and it made me question how much difficult it was to navigate being comfortable with who I think I am and who I want to become in the future. So that's definitely one of the biggest troubles I've had with COVID is that identity crisis,
Hmm.
because a big part of my identity was I was a university student working towards a degree, and that was removed from me. And when I came back, it just felt like it was two puzzle pieces that no longer fit together
Yeah.
because, I think some people think that you remove something from someone and you put it back there again for them. It's going to be like how it was before, but it wasn't like how it was before. I'm seeing new faces. I'm feeling like I don't belong in the environment anymore because during those 2 years, I aged 2 years. When COVID started, I was 22. And then when I came back, I was like turning 24.
Mm.
That was crazy for me. I'm like, I shouldn't be in university anymore. At that point, I should have graduated already. And that's
Yeah.
when I felt so displaced in my own space where I identified so much of.
Oh, yeah.
And it was such a hard transition.
I bet. Yeah. I
Oh,
mean, you're just moving out into the world and kind of coming to a place of your own identity as a person, as a
yeah,
student, and then it just kind of freezes right up, right? And
exactly.
then what are you supposed to do? Yeah, I can see how that would be really challenging.
Yeah, it was very challenging. And at that point in my life, that's when I started relating to my friends who are international students. There's a lot of international students in Kwantlen, and there's a lot of people that are international students here in Canada and
Yep.
in our city specifically. And whenever they would talk about their experiences of, oh, I just felt like I was put in a place where I don't know myself and I don't know my identity. I felt like in a way I related to that again. It's not
Hmm.
like I never related to that before because as an immigrant, I know that one because I lived through it, right? And at some point somehow I'm still living through it. But I related to them in a university student aspect where there's this expectation of, yeah, you're part of this university, you're a student here, this is your own space now. And I never felt like I was out of place before until like at that point when I came back from COVID. That's when I fully understood how it must have felt like for international students to be in a new country studying without family.
Oh,
And
yeah.
those are some of the things that my friends are saying as well because there's a pressure of doing well because they're paying a lot of money just to study here.
Mhm.
And there's a pressure of not disappointing their family. And there's also a pressure of like making connections in a new country where they don't know anyone and even learning the language itself. So one of my friends actually said it felt like she created stress for herself just putting that on herself.
But
And
But the fact that she felt like she had to put it on
Yeah.
herself is
Yeah.
interesting, right? Because it means
Mhm.
it's not ready-made in the environment. It's not
Mhm.
provided in the environment, which it should
Mhm.
be, right?
Mhm.
All these things about particularly a sense of belonging and place, feeling
Yeah.
like you belong in the place, and then
Yeah.
feeling emotionally safe to be who you are in that place and to
Mhm.
explore it in a way that's interesting and exciting. The fact that the
Mhm.
environment doesn't create or facilitate that very well
Yeah.
means that it's left to your friend to do it on her own, which of course is hugely stressful.
Yeah. And what she said was she felt like she was always on survival mode at
Sure.
that point. And I totally empathize with her because I just can't imagine enough being in that position as much as she can. But what she did tell me how she kind of worked through that was through friends' support, the friends that she's made here so far. Also, most of them are other international students, and through family support as well, talking through it with her family. She was able to work through those issues herself.
Every learner who gets through it
Mhm.
and who comes to feel like they can make up that gap in their
Mhm.
own ways,
Yeah.
they will, develop some resilience and as a result of that, which is good for
Mhm.
them because they have a new skill. They might not have got that skill in that same way if that
Mhm.
hadn't happened, but it's a heavy price to pay because there are many, many learners who don't get there, right? Who don't
Yeah.
get to that place, who remain
Because
stuck. It might be that some learners develop some great resilience skills here, right?
yeah.
As a result of this. And that's awesome for them and
Yeah.
will really help them. But a lot of learners are just getting stuck and they're not able to kind of thrive in the way that they would want to
Mhm.
because it's just too much. And I completely understand that, right? It's just
Mhm.
there's a way in which you could be completely overwhelmed by all this stuff.
Some students develop that resilience and learn it themselves that they can get these supports from people around them, or like they learn ways to cope with what they're going through. And it's kind of worrying how like not all students actually develop that one,
Hmm.
right? Because I went through a dark patch myself, and I also got help from friends, and I started opening up with family as well, that I was able to overcome those, and like overcome like wanting to quit school, and overcome my doubts and anxiety about my own skill of finishing school, and as well as other things with my life. But if I had never learned that, I would have probably quit school already and just, just kept working in a retail job.
Hmm.
So I do agree with you. I'm thankful that I was able to learn that, but not again, like what you said, not all students learn that
No,
skill themselves, right?
no.
And
And I don't think we should approach this as a kind of filter. I don't think we should approach
yeah.
university as a kind of filter where if
Mhm.
you can make it, great, then you're welcome
Mhm.
here. But if you struggle in some way, then you shouldn't. Maybe this isn't the right place for you, right?
Yeah.
I think we should really try to be as welcoming and as possible in the university system. And everybody has a right, I think, to
Yeah.
to pursue post-secondary learning. And it's hard to know who will be who will be okay and who will not be okay. Because a lot of the people who get through and do okay, we might look at them and say they're resilient, but underneath it, they might really still be struggling or they might develop all kinds of mental health adaptations or carry lots of
Yeah.
stress and
Yeah.
really not be doing okay, even when we ask
Yeah.
them. Or even
Yeah.
even if they're not really aware they're not doing
Yeah.
that well. Because people's self-awareness is not always great. And
Mhm.
a lot of the people who might seem to be really struggling and who are just kind of hanging on and
Mhm.
not doing very well, say academically, a lot of those people, they're doing the best they can and they're already applying a lot of psychological skill to try to navigate something that's really difficult. And, you know, I was as a student myself, I really struggled in my early life.
Mhm.
And so I have the firsthand knowledge of what it can be like to feel like you're doing the best you possibly can and it's still not good enough for the
Yeah.
system that is not designed to assess your mental health and well-being, but only measures you based on these numbers like grades.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can be a very ruthless system.
It is, and it's it is very unfortunate how I do agree with you that some people they learn the skills to cope better, but a lot of the times, and I've went through it myself where I learned to mask it. Like,
Hmm.
everything's fine.
Yeah.
Nothing is going wrong. Oh, I'm passing all of my classes, but in reality, I'm always just so exhausted because on top of being in school, I was also working, and what I sacrificed in those times where I was able to work and have good grades in school is what I sacrificed my relationships with my friends, and I lost connections for months, and it's still happening that I'm losing connections for months on end with the friendships that I have because I'm keeping up with these 2 things because I can't give up my job because I need to fund my education, and I need to pay rent, and I need to pay bills. And I can't just give up with my schooling as well because this is what now I felt like what's giving me accomplishment,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
feel accomplished when I have good grades.
Yeah. And giving you a pathway too toward your
Yeah,
future, whatever that's going to look like for you.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so these
It
things are very, very important.
Yeah, and it's just it's unfortunate that at this point in my adult life that I have to choose one or the other. I have to give up one at least to
Hmm.
maintain all of them
Hmm.
or to at least have a good I have it good for one of them. And it's so hard to figure out how to have it good for all of them, which
Hmm.
is having a good balance of social life, having a good balance of work life, and having a good balance of my school life. And having those three things, I feel like there's not enough time in the world to have it good for
No,
all three
no, there
things.
isn't. And
Yeah.
and that's unfortunate. But what if we change the system a little bit so that
Yeah.
some of the social stuff happened more in school
Mhm.
and some of the work stuff also happened in the context of school, right? So you
Yeah.
could blend these three things
Mhm.
together and maybe create some kind of synergy there where they all worked, kind of amplifying one another. That would be
Yeah.
ideal. And this is of course possible to do, but it requires a really intentional design focused approach to how teaching and learning works. And
Mhm.
and it, it's something that a lot of people are trying to do in education. So
Mhm.
I'm hopeful about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. I think the separation between these three things adds a whole other level of stress for people, or it can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's like one of the things that adds to students' mental health problems because they can't find a balance for those three. And then what happens is their well being also just kind of deteriorates at that
Hmm.
point.
Yeah.
Um, so we've talked about quite a bit of the bad stuff and the more kind of problems that students face, as well as some of the things that might be causing those problems for students. Now, I kind of want to talk about some good things that maybe students can do for themselves because at this point in my life, I'm ending my student career, hopefully going into another one, going into grad school if I get accepted. But the past few months, I got more inspired, being more aware of my health and well being. But I want to foster this conversation as well because I think a lot of the times we've discussed this in class as well. A lot of the times people don't think that what they're doing is actually not as good for them as they think it would be. Like
Hmm.
we talked about what's good for mental health, and like people would say, "Oh yeah, binging Netflix is kind of like a good break." Because I do that, and I was
Sure.
like, "Oh my god,
Sure.
that's not that good." I didn't even
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So like that was like one of the first times I've like heard of that. I'm like, "Oh, I guess it's not good to like spend hours on end
Yeah.
watching Netflix at home."
Yeah. Yep, and we all do things that are sort of coping, right? And,
Yeah.
in the clinical work that I do, I'm aware that, since the pandemic has started, the levels of drinking, alcohol consumption have gone up pretty
Yeah.
dramatically for a lot of people too. So So everyone's doing this kind of, coping, just trying to get through what
Yeah.
is a really stressful period, right, for us as a society. But yeah, on the upside, what are things that people could or should or might maybe do in this kind of a situation? We've talked, as you mentioned, we talked about these kind of things in class, and there's kind of a long list, right?
Yeah.
Trying to find a community of people where you feel a deep sense of belonging,
Mhm.
trying to cultivate some space of emotional safety where you can talk about things when you're struggling, trying to
Yeah.
cultivate through those two things a greater sense of self-awareness so that we can be, more in tune with our ability to regulate our emotions, to be aware of our emotions, to process our
Mhm.
emotions, and to
Mhm.
be connected to other people in relationships, which are all emotional, right?
Yeah.
As you know, I'm a big fan of movement and
Yeah.
exercise and wellness practices, getting outside. um,
Mhm.
you know, Nutrition and eating well, of course, should
Mhm.
be ideally a part of that. So it's a bunch of moving parts. And last week
Mhm.
we talked about sleep and the importance of
Mhm.
being rested and being able to have moments of stillness.
Mhm.
So I don't think that, I know that one of the few things that I feel like I can be fairly definitive about after spending
Mhm.
my whole career in the mental health world is that everybody is a little bit different. And
Yeah.
the thing that works for one person is not necessarily going to be the thing that works for you. And I do get concerned about what I see in social media, which is, all this kind of shouting from the rooftops about, do this one thing and it will change your life. And that is
Yeah.
almost never the case, right? In a positive way.
Yeah.
Usually it's a bunch of little things. It's a bunch of
Mhm.
little things that we could just tweak a little bit and be a little bit more attentive to. And that
Yeah.
slowly starts to shift the
Mhm.
direction that we're going in over time. We're very delicate in that way. And we're easily harmed, actually. I think, humans
Mhm.
emotionally, things set us off in weird ways. Often surprising moments hurt us more than we expect they will. We get sidelined by all kinds of things that go on inside of ourselves and that happen around us. And navigating that stuff is never just a matter of I'll do this one thing. It's
Yeah.
really just
Yeah.
because a bunch of different things have impacted us. And so, we got to tackle these things carefully and in the right order,
Yeah.
and in a way that is really caring of the fact that we can continue to harm ourselves by trying to get better, like with exercise, for example.
Yeah.
You can do exercise in a way that's joyful and open and fun, or you can do exercise in a way that's just about beating yourself up or about shaming yourself for not fitting a certain standard of or
Mhm.
ideal that you think you should meet. And
Mhm.
so anything that's a health practice can also be done in a way that's damaging. So I think
Yeah.
it's very important that people just kind of pay attention to that stuff. I also think that for most of us, we have at any given moment, we have one big unaddressed thing, one thing that we really haven't dealt with. And for many people, it's one big thing that happened, one big trauma, maybe, or something that happened in their
Oh,
family,
I
even a long
remember we
time
talked
ago.
about
Yeah,
this in
yeah,
class.
yeah,
And when you brought this topic up for like a week, I was thinking like, what's my one big thing? If this makes sense, what is my one big thing? And
yeah,
then so for a week, I was just like ruminating. I was just like, wait, Ross was saying something about one big thing. I have that. I knew I have it, but I just never thought of it that way.
yeah,
And then I figured it out, and it just felt like, you know what? It gave me some sort of like direction and more motivation. I'm like, I can work on this one big thing. And it's not like I'm thinking that it's going to solve everything
no,
else, but
no,
it's going to help at least have some progress on making myself feel better in a way where I'm gonna be more secured. Cause like it's so hard unlearning bad thinking. And that's one of the things
yeah,
that I think a lot of students actually go through as well.
yeah,
Bad thinking about like I'm gonna fail this class, bad thinking about like
yeah.
um
And we
social
talked
issues
about
about
this
like your
this
yeah,
negativity bias in
yeah,
class. Yeah, yeah,
exactly. And it's just it's interesting because at least for that one, for that day, that lesson, it just opened my eyes a bit. more of thinking about it a different way because for me, how I like to deal with problems is I'll see a problem, I'll try and deal with that problem. Because I try not thinking too much in the future problem, which is another problem. So I worked on that one. So I'm more in the moment, but then I never thought of it that, okay, there could be one big thing that's affecting things. Because
Hmm.
even if I keep working on the little things that I'm trying to work on, if I have that one big thing, I feel like I'm not gonna be working on I feel like I'm gonna be more productive if I try and work on the one big
Yeah,
thing.
sure. Because the one big thing
Yeah.
is often connected to the little things
Yeah.
too, right? It's the little things
Yeah.
are like a miniature reflection of the
Yeah.
one big thing. And yeah, I mean, the one big thing is an interesting idea because
It is an
often,
interesting.
often we carry some pain or some loss or some grief or some
Mhm,
fear, whatever it
mhm,
is, around something really big that happened and it's not really been resolved, and we feel kind of harmed by that usually.
mhm,
And there's a flip side of it too, which is that this experience gave us something, right? It set us on
mhm.
a path somehow. It's given us something, and finding the something, finding the thing that the kind of the wisdom hidden inside the wounding, as I like to call it, is is I think really important, right? Finding out that, life kind of sometimes feels like it takes something from us, but then it also gives something. And so
Yeah,
finding that is the way through the one big thing. And then once we start to see both sides of the one big thing, then it becomes clear that the way we look at all these little things, is somehow related to the big thing, because the
yeah,
big thing has defined us and it has
yeah,
defined it to some extent, and it's defined
yeah.
our approach to other problems. And so
Uh-huh.
when we have these little problems, we approach them in the
Yeah.
same way that we approach or don't approach the big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I found out too when I discovered my one big thing. I was just like, "Oh, I kept avoiding a lot of these things because it relates to my one big thing, and I always avoid the one big thing, so now I keep avoiding everything."
Yeah, exactly.
That's
That's
what
the
I
trap we get
discovered. So
in.
like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
okay, avoidance is what I learned from my one big thing. I
Yeah.
kept making it as an excuse.
Yeah.
That was one of my revelations during that time. And it's just interesting. And I remember also it's kind of like at least how I thought about it, it's like perspective taking.
Hmm.
Remember when we went to the D's Island and we went
Hmm.
to that top thing and then we could see like the whole of BC or something like that, or at
Yeah.
least the lower
Yeah.
mainland.
Yeah.
It's I learned about perspective taking before from my counseling classes, but I've never really looked at it in that way, in like a visual sense.
Hmm.
So I understood it, but I never really understood it until that time.
Oh,
So,
good.
because it is like stepping back,
Yeah.
and it's good to step back
Yeah.
because it relates to how I said earlier that I step back as well from social media because at that point, when I step back from social media, that's when I can see how it's affecting me and what's actually happening around.
Mhm.
So I'm looking at it from outside the box, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really insightful and a really
Yeah.
important thing to do.
Yeah. And I think another thing that a lot of I think another thing that we could also take advantage because like for students at least, a lot of the times there's this barrier that we try to avoid whenever because I know a lot of my peers they want to get better as well, but there's this barrier of money,
Mhm.
you know, because a lot of the times when they try and seek help, at least the ones I know and myself, I try and seek help. I'm trying to get counseling, but the resources is not as accessible as people make it seem to be. And one, it's expensive. Also, the free counseling services, you have to wait months just to get in. And then once you get one counseling session, you have to wait like a few more weeks to just get another one. And then now you've gone over your problem. Like, oh, I got over it. I don't even need
Yeah.
counseling anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, like, finding those alternatives at least to better uh mental health and well-being was really really hard, and that's when we start to going back to just the easier ones, the ones that are short-lived. Like
Mm.
that's why we binge Netflix, or that's why we drink, that's why we we smoke weed or anything like that, really. It's just because it gets too much and we just want some relief, but a lot of them are very temporary relief.
Yeah.
So one of the
Yeah.
things I really like is just, you know, kind of taking a walk because I take walks with my clients at work and I really do enjoy them. So I remember my class from last semester, I took environmental psychology and I learned this concept of restorative environment.
Hmm.
And one of the restorative environments that are studied a lot is being with nature. And
Hmm.
then this semester we started going on nature walks and we were outside for a bit when it was still warmer. And I was like, yes, nature is really, really nice. So I think that's one of my restorative environments. Also, quiet places like museums or like aquariums. And, you know, I think a lot more people should take advantage of that. It's free.
They should, and
Yeah.
there is a movement. Um,
Mhm.
it started in the United Kingdom, in England. It's known as creative health.
Mhm.
Or social prescribing is this kind of
Mhm.
similar sort of idea, which is just about this, that, it's not sufficient just to provide counseling services for people in
Mhm.
distress. There's never enough counseling services, and it's not
Mhm.
really, it also is expensive, and
Mhm.
we're not gonna heal the world just by making more counselors available, right?
Yeah.
So what else is required? What's required is people having a community, a sense of community and engagement and creativity and playfulness and fun and social connection, all these things that are missing that you've just
Yeah.
described. And so there are programs in the UK that are focused explicitly on this, going to
Mhm.
museums, going
Mhm.
to concerts. I've been involved in several research
Mhm.
projects at museums
Yeah.
that are about this, and
Yeah.
helping museum visitors to
Yeah.
use the museum as a mental health kind of
Yeah.
outing. So yes,
Yeah.
this stuff is very important and is
Yeah.
becoming part of the mainstream conversation in
Yeah.
cultural settings in places like museums.
Yeah. And like while doing research to do this podcast interview, I did stumble upon one research where like there's a difference with going for a walk yourself versus going for a walk with a friend and how you feel afterwards.
Hmm.
So going a walk with a friend makes you makes you feel better than just going on a walk just by yourself.
Yeah,
So
I'm.
I think that's just very, very interesting because not just being in nature itself is what's beneficial, it's having the company and enjoying that company and being with nature is what is restorative to the person.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and we can do that kind of thing in the classroom setting
Yeah.
in our class. So we're trying to combine these two things
Yeah.
together, an educational project with a mental health project at the same
Mhm.
time, right? So it can be done. It's not,
Mhm.
I mean, it's not impossible to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, s- I'm hoping that will evolve, the education system will evolve from
It
here
will.
on, just for the benefit of everyone.
Hmm.
And again, specifically for me, I have a very um strong passion about students' well-being because as a student myself right now, it was really, really hard out here being a student and just maintaining that one because
Yeah.
you get better and then you get worse again
Hmm.
after.
Yeah.
It's like you have it for 5 minutes and then it's gone again afterwards.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I think we've covered everything that I wanted to talk about today.
Okay.
And I really appreciate your time today, Dr. Ross. And this is this is very insightful for me. This is kind of like just a recap of some of the things that we go through in class, but in a more intimate level because I don't really talk in class that much.
Hmm.
But I appreciate your time, and hopefully, everyone who watches this appreciates um, our conversation as well, and you learn something from it. And yeah, thank you so much. Have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope this conversation gave you some insights on students' mental health and well being, and hopefully inspires you to open up this conversation with others as well. Have a great day, guys.